very heightened awareness of politics, of the role of government, of the role of powers, of superpowers, and the abuse of power. And we're interested in reflecting on what that all means for science communication. And when we think about science communication, we tend probably to avoid partisan politics, but we can't avoid policy making and government. And the relationships that we have with policymakers or with governments and state institutions can often be difficult, different contexts, but they're also necessary. If we look at how science communication has developed across the world over recent decades, a crucial role has been played by governments and state agencies in establishing an infrastructure or establishing a policy framework for science communication. And at the time of the pandemic and now at a time of war, we're even more acutely aware of the difficulty of these relationships with government, but also their vitality, the essential nature of these relationships. It's probably fair to say that government interest and public interest in the communication of science is at higher levels than ever before as a consequence of the pandemic. I think it's probably fair to say too that science and science communication are fundamentally democratic endeavors. Scientists are, unless they've had their heads completely turned, are dedicated to sharing their knowledge through publication, through conferences, and by other means. That's a fundamentally democratic idea, sharing of knowledge. And in science communication, we add to that, and we also aim possibly to make institutions of power, including institutions of science, more accountable. But it's also the case that science can be abused and misused, as we are seeing daily in the Russian assault on Ukraine, where science and technology and massive human and financial resources are being applied to destroy lives, homes, cities, infrastructure, cultural heritage. And from the point of view of communication, it's a well-known cliche. I'm sure you've all heard it, but it's still worth saying that the first casualty of war is truth. And we really do see that in these days. So it's a challenge to people in science communication, ourselves included. What do we have to say about the misuses of science, the misuses of power in the name of science even, and how free are we across various countries to say what we want to say? How do we negotiate those difficult relations with power, and particularly when power is being abused? So these are kind of general guiding questions for our discussion, but we'll start by getting some more individual perspectives from our 4 roundtable participants who come from 4 different linguistic and political cultures, so different backgrounds, but all have a connection with the scientific committee of the PCST network. 2, Marlit and Mohamed, whom you'll hear from in a moment, joined the committee last year, and 2, Michel and Julia, were long-term members of the committee in the 2000s and the 2010s. So Marlit, we'll start with you, if you don't mind, the Director of Communication and Training and Strategy at the University of Virginia in the United States. You have a background in international affairs and public policy, as graduate in both of those subjects, and a PhD in communication, which was based on research about communicating science with policymakers. So from all of that, and from your interactions with lawmakers as part of your research in the Georgia State Assembly and Senate, what did you take from all that about the relations between science and politics and science and government? And indeed, what might you characterize as a healthy relationship between science and politics? So Marlit.
Thank you, Brian. And good morning from the United States. I love this question. And I had to almost giggle when I saw a healthy relationship between science and politics and science communication. So my background, I started in my role was to be a liaison between Georgia legislators who represent a local district in the state of Georgia and our scientists at Georgia Tech. This was many years ago. And what I came to realize was that conversation, we all know this is not news to us, was extremely difficult because scientists and politicians have different priorities. They have different ways of talking and speaking, and they have different agendas. And I'm not going to say which one's right or wrong, but they didn't have the same priorities. To try to persuade them either direction, I once sat in a hearing defining an embryo, and the chairman of that committee trotted out several scientists, and it was clear that he had a certain goal he was trying to reach, and the way he wanted to define it. This was speaking to the broader issue of abortion in the state of Georgia, and he used scientists to get to his ends. And that was a real hard thing for me to watch, because at that point in my career, I wanted science to be pure and untainted and sacred, and not be used for, somebody's political purposes. But it was also really important for me to see that and witness that, because it enlightened me to help me know that to reach that place of a healthy relationship, which to me means I'm listening to you, you're listening to me. We feel comfortable asking each other questions. We feel comfortable hearing answers we may not want to hear. That's a healthy relationship. But where we are today is we're afraid to say what we think, because we're not sure that won't be used against us. And so to answer your question, how do we get there? I think it all comes down to building trust at the micro level with individuals. And it's a very difficult task to do. That's where I've seen the most success, is to have trust with the people I'm working with. So they'll take my call, they'll respond to my email, they'll listen to what I have to say. It's extremely complex, but those are my thoughts.
Do I understand you correctly to say that these relationships have become more difficult in recent times?
Yes.
And what's behind that? Is this to do with political, ideological changes that are going on, or what?
In the U.S. in particular, in what feels like a very short period of time, different political ideas, we're not comfortable talking to each other anymore. We're scared of what will happen. We're not comfortable saying, well, how do you think we should handle this problem? We've gotten so far apart on our value systems. And therefore it makes the communication really, really difficult. It's not a good time for us in the US right now in terms of being able to talk about things and get a full understanding of the information around a subject.
It's interesting that you touched on the question of defining an embryo in a particular ideological and political context, because the overnight news from the Supreme Court in the United States is certainly very troubling, I think, from that point of view. But we won't necessarily draw you further on that one. Let's move on. And it is interesting, and it is salutary to have started with the United States of America, which defines itself as the leader of the free world. To realize that there are restrictions on freedoms there, and there are political complexities there. But let's move over to where Mohamed is in Egypt, and I should have wished you Eid Mubarak. And you're a freelance science communicator. You're a graduate of pharmacological sciences and of science communication. You've studied in the United Kingdom as well as elsewhere, and you're working actively to develop networks of science communication across the Arab world. So having worked and studied in these various different contexts, are there core values related to science and democracy, or science and politics, that you've developed from this experience? And how do you see them playing out in the context that you're working in?
Okay, thank you for having me today, and Eid Mubarak, thank you. Actually, I would say it is completely different. I mean, the situation in the Arab world are completely different, because I can say easily that we don't have almost any democratic regimes at the moment. Even we have some kingdoms with no constitution. So I mean, the whole policy making process is like you have a king, you have a president to do what he wants to do. So it was a little bit like different. I remember when I studied in the UK, in the first lecture for the course Science and Policy, I was asked about my opinion about policy making in Egypt, and I said, I'm 25 years old, which I spent 22 years of them under the same president. So I have no idea about what's going on. So yeah, so of course in this context is the relationship between science, society, and policy, and the role of science communicators within that is not that clear, because even I would say if you ask anyone to define what is science communication in the Arab world, they will not consider like advising about science or the role of science in policy making as part of it. It's more seen within the context of doing science journalism or like science in the media or even informal science education. So this part like is it looks like it is completely skipped from the whole context. And one of the main challenges that faces us in the Arab world, like the lack of strategy at national levels for science communication. And with these like complex issues I already referred to, it's difficult for science communication community to be heard, that they want to have a voice, they want to say, okay, we need to have a clear strategy, we want to do this, and that. And that's one of the main reasons that we decided to establish the Arab Forum of Science, Media, and the Communication, because I think currently in the Arab world, we have reached this kind of critical mass where we have a lot of people working in science, media, and the communication and the related fields, so that we should be heard, we should have our input, and we should be clear that our role, part of our roles as science communicators and science journalists and media professionals, to have a say about science, and science should be included in policy making in a clear way.
Thank you. Are there any circumstances that you know of in the region where science communicators have been restricted in doing what they would like to do, or subject to any kind of repression?
In some cases, yes. I would say, like, if a journalist want to raise an issue that a government doesn't want anybody to talk about, at least for the moment, yeah, there can be some kind of repression. Also, usually science journalism and science media as like used to be seen as this kind of safe space. Like, I'm a science journalist, I'm writing about science, which has nothing related to policy making, but of course you discover no, it's related to policy. When we speak like try to raise awareness about something like climate change, like for example my hometown Alexandria is will be one of the most affected cities by the sea rise level, and if you want to speak about this, then the government can be not that happy for people to speak about this openly. And even like sometimes if scientists have some kind of political let's say political opinions that doesn't fit with the government, they can be even excluded and demonized, and in some cases they start to question their research. So we have a researcher who made a couple of papers about this topic, specifically about like the dangers to Alexandria because of the sea level rise. And then the government like start issuing statements kind of, okay, this is not true, he's like has his own political agenda, or he doesn't want to like he tried to say, okay, Egypt will not be safe, or like spread fear and misinformation, while actually it's a very good piece of scientific work. I mean, it was a research that published in one of the Nature journals, and he considered to be one of the specialized scientists in this field. But again, because of here there is interference with policy, so you can see what may happen.
Well, that's certainly a very compelling and difficult case. Let's move on. Julia Tagüeña, who's a physicist, a science communicator, professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and she was formerly a director at CONACYT, the Mexican National Council for Science and Technology. And you have a personal and family background that probably gives you a very particular perspective on science and democracy. Your father was a physicist. You became a physicist. Your sister became a physicist. Your father was exiled from Spain during the Civil War to the Soviet Union, but you were born in Czechoslovakia. I can't keep up, but then eventually you end up in Mexico. So how has all that influenced your take on science, society, politics, government, and so on?
Well, as you just mentioned, what is happening in Ukraine reminds me very much of my family story. Yes, my parents were exiled from the Spanish Civil War, and my father, although he just had finished studying physics before the war, he had an important role in the Republican Army. And after the war was lost, being a communist, they emigrated to Russia, where he became a part of the Red Army during the Second World War. But the Soviet Union was not what they were expecting. And I am talking about the economic difficulties, but about the lack of freedom and freedom of speech, about the repression, the killing, and sending to Siberia, for instance, to the survivors of the international brigades that fought in Spain. My family had the chance to move to Yugoslavia. And then when Tito broke with Stalin, they moved to Czechoslovakia, where I was born. Life in Brno was much better. The war times were over, and they worked at the university. And yes, you're right, my father went back to science. He always had science as a backup, and he decided to study medicine there. And this was a very good time for me, not as it had been for my older sister that was born in Moscow during the war. However, living in a country under Stalin's regime was always a danger. My parents imagined possible invasions to the satellite countries that later happened to Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and now is happening to Ukraine. When Stalin died, they took the risk of saying that they wanted to leave and they could finally emigrate to Mexico. That generously very opened the door to many Spaniards. Of around 20,000 was the Spanish migration to Mexico after the Civil War. Once in Mexico, many old friends did not want to believe the stories they told until the perestroika opened to the truth, talking about truth. It was hard for them to accept that what they started as a youth dream finished being a cruel repression. Putin is repeating the same format, and it is heartbreaking to see what's happening in Ukraine and within Russia, where there is no chance to be a critic, and betray and spying to the neighbors becomes a way of survival. My mother was a Spanish teacher, and her students went to the train station when we were going to from Brno to Prague. One of them, when the train started to move, and I remember this very well, ran close to the train, screaming in Spanish, "Digan la verdad," tell the truth. And we are talking here about telling the truth. My parents were up to the challenge. They both wrote their memories telling their story. We found in Mexico hospitality and freedom. They had to start from scratch once again. But Mexico, with many problems, as all Latin American countries have, is a great country and with many possibilities. In Mexico, I had the chance of studying at the National Public University, and I had a scholarship to do the PhD. And as I came here as a small child, I am a Mexican. I married a Mexican. Here are my children, and even more important, my grandchildren. My parents are buried in Mexico because exile changes roots. It is so surprising that even people that could have been very well informed don't want to analyze the history of what Stalin did to the left movement of the world. Of course, there are many other stories of repression and hate. We should criticize them all. We should, as my mother's students scream at the station, tell the truth, the real facts. But the list of real facts could be very long. So what we should do as science communicators is to give each child a way to think in a scientific way, so they can build a critical thinking and cannot be convinced easily manipulating the truth and telling lies. However, we must accept that scientific thinking is not enough. And ethical behavior and empathy are also fundamental, and they have to go in parallel. I think that we should all imagine ourselves in this queue going away from the war, carrying our children with us, cold, hungry, losing everything, the normal life we had. We should imagine that, and not to become, too angry, not to think in revenge, but to become a pacifist. So I think that science communicators will have a big work in telling the truth.
Julia, thank you very much. And you managed to weave your own story and bring it round to the role of science communicators. If you don't mind, I'm going to, because you discovered more recently that Mexico was not always free.
No, there is no perfect country.
And it is difficult sometimes to tell the truth, but we'll come back to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
I just want to bring Michel in. And Michel Claessens is a former head of communication at ITER, which is a major international nuclear fusion project. And before that, Michel was an official at the European Commission. He's also a prolific author, and his most recent book is on the science and politics of COVID-19. You have worked in international contexts, Michel, with the European Commission and more recently with ITER. And this must have demonstrated to you the importance of scientific cooperation across borders. What do you see as current threats to that cooperation, and particularly, what might be the fallout from the present war?
Yeah, the context, the current. Thank you first, Brian, to organize this roundtable and for inviting me. Also, thank you, Jenny. For this, I'm pleased to contribute modestly to the discussion. Of course, the current context is very difficult and raises a lot of issue at political level, diplomatic level, but also in terms of science, scientific cooperation, and science communication. I got questions from people, why ITER still has Russia as a member today. We have seen in the past also that scientific cooperation survived in war times, and I think this is a very positive thing in principle. At ITER, it involves 35 countries, so it's a huge international cooperation. And what I've seen, so the project was officially launched in 2007. What I've seen is that despite difficult times in terms of politics and diplomacy since that date, the project has continued and has secured the funding, the support from all the countries. So this is in a way very good, because ITER is a pacific, peaceful and scientific project. So it is also very positive that we can secure this huge international cooperation. But there are threats on this, of course. At any time, I've seen also in the past some meetings which have been cancelled because of political tensions between the US and Russia at that time. But globally, the project is still on the line, and this is very good. What will be the future? I don't know. What will be the impact of the current war? I don't know precisely. I just hope that scientific cooperation can be maintained and can continue, as we have seen also during the Second World War, where there was also a huge scientific cooperation with the Manhattan Project, which succeeded to stop at the end the war.
But Michel, in more recent times, ITER, your relationship with ITER has become difficult, not to say conflictual. You've become a whistleblower on your former employees there, highlighting cases of bad management and super stress among employees. How does that all come to pass, and what position does that leave you in relation to your former employers, indeed your former colleagues?
Yeah, this has been a difficult step for me. So I used to be the head of communication from 2011 to 2015 at ITER. And then suddenly the new director general decided to fire me. Although he said that it was not because of my professional competence. So, voila, I was prepared to that in a way. I know that the appointment of a new boss can also involve and imply some reshuffling in the staff. I had no problem with this, and the relationship were fine after this. It's only when I told the management of ITER that I am going to write a book on ITER, which can be natural as a science communicator, to write a book, to explain to the public, because I welcomed at ITER hundreds of groups of visitors, and most of them were telling us that, oh, this project is fantastic, it's great what you are doing, but the media are not reporting very much on the project. So this encouraged me to write a book and to provide a popularized presentation of ITER. So when I told the management of ITER about this, they were not very happy. But okay, eventually I published 2 books, one in French and one in English on ITER, which have been very positively reviewed. If you read them, you will see they are quite positive about the project. No problem. My only error, if I can say, is that I decide to address in an open way the big issues about the project, about the cost, about the delays, about the uncertainties, etc. And this is probably my mistake, if I can say. So I don't want to give too much detail about this, but the result is that I am now on the blacklist, definitely. I cannot access the ITER site anyway. I've been invited to accompany a European commissioner on the site for a visit. The management say okay for the commissioner, but Mr. Claessens, no, he will wait at the entrance of the site. Okay, voila, this is the current situation. So this is only the personal story about ITER. But then I discovered, because I still have a lot of contacts in the project, I think my reputation is still quite good. So I learned a lot about the management of the project, about the decisions which have been taken. A lot of people have been fired. There have been 2 suicides recently on the site, 1 suicide attempt. There are decisions hidden to the Autorité de Sûreté Nucléaire, which is overseeing the project from the nuclear point of view. There are lies, there are wrong information which are repeatedly disseminated by the management. So at some stage, you ask yourself the question, what do I do? Either I say, okay, I give up, it's no longer my problem, I recently retired, so okay. Or you say, no, sorry, against my personal values, I cannot keep silent, and I have to inform at least the European authorities, because there are huge budget involved in this project. So this is not an easy decision, of course. I talked to my family about this, because if you go public, you take risk, definitely. So, but we decided to continue and to at least to inform the European authorities about the mismanagement practices. This is what I have done with the support of my family. This is a very personal decision, not easy. I still have to be careful about what I say in public. As you know, probably I've been invited by the European Parliament to make a presentation of my experiments. You can consult this presentation online. This is public. I'm quite clear about what I say, I think. Voilà. So I don't know if things will move after this, but at least I am in line with my values. And I've done this also to help the younger generation, because it's not just about science, but if we want to help our son, our children, our grandchildren, I think we have also to say stop when something is really not fair, not correct. We have to tell people and the society, just to make the life, maybe, hopefully, the life of the young generation a little bit easier. Voilà. Thank you.
Michel, thank you very much. Marlit, would you like to respond to what you just heard there? How does that strike you?
As noble and courageous and brave and really important. It was very moving to hear that story. And I'm sure, Michel, that it was very stressful for your family to have to sort of decide to take that risk. So thank you. I'm not sure that's what you were looking for, Brian, but that's what I was thinking.
Well, absolutely. And I wonder, Michel, have you sought support from the wider community of science communicators, science journalists, and other associations?
I do have a lot of support. Since the speech I gave in the parliament, I received dozens of messages of all positive, from the scientific community, from journalists, because a lot of media talked about my case and the report, including science communicators. So the support I received has been tremendously positive. I did not expect this, and this was not the goal of my. But in a way, this is very encouraging and reassuring. And now I'm receiving even more testimonies from staff in ITER. Basically, they say, "Oh, thank you. You said loudly what everyone thinks here in silence." And so, thank you for daring speaking out. One journalist also, for example, and this is a good message for science communicators, one journalist of a famous French newspaper told me, "Oh, Mr. Claessens, thank you for this, because you see, without people like you, you have one foot in the project and one foot outside the project. For us, it's impossible to know what's going on in a complex project like ITER or a complex organization. So you really make the link between the science which is being done there and the society. And I think this is basically our role as science communicator, to be this essential link between the science community and the society."
Yeah, very inspiring, Michel. Thank you very much. There's some questions in which I might ask. And now, of course, I can't find Q&A. There was a question from Tass Gascoigne, which Marlit, you might like to pick up, where Tass is asking, how come science is now seen as a left-wing activity in some countries, including his own country, Australia, and your country, United States? Is that the case? I mean, that science is identified with, well, maybe not left and right, but certainly Democrat or Republican, and that the war on science, so-called, comes mainly from the Republican side of the political spectrum. Marlit, would you like to respond to that?
Not really. I don't know. I think there's definitely some truth to Tass's observation, or and I don't know. I was alluding to it in my previous remarks about how we're getting farther and farther apart, and values such as science are getting, it's just a mess. I don't know, Tass. I wish I had some better insight there, but if any of my fellow panelists do, I would love to hear it.
Well, we might just move on because there are other questions coming in, but we'll just leave that one sit there for the moment. Sarah Davies asks, what can those of us who are in relatively privileged sites, but we just heard a story from Western Europe, which might be one of those relatively privileged sites, what can we do where we have more freedom to support colleagues in places or situations where communication is more constrained? Mohamed, what sort of support, I mean, considering the situation that you described earlier on, what sort of support would you like to see coming from other parts of the world?
This is a really very important question, because and also it's tricky, honestly. I think that the support we would like to see it's to have this kind of, I would say, more kind of neutral empathy and support, because in many cases, as we have seen, these kind of supports came from what we refer to as the West, is usually conditional. It depends on what is the situation, what is the victim, is this fit within the political agenda for the West or not? So you can see that in some cases, the West will speak up and try to support and even push the government to act against one of problems, for example, for press freedom, for example, in a certain cases, but in other cases, it will not be the same. You can see that there are double standards. And I can give you an example, something personal about this. So I was writing an interview with a Palestinian female scientist because she won a prestigious award to highlight women in STEM in the Middle East. So the whole thing was in Arabic. And one of the obstacles that she highlighted, since she is based in Palestine, that usually she faced difficulties because of the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And she gave an example that some of her field researchers were detained by Israeli army because they're trying to collect some kind of data about a number of Arabs and Palestinians live in Jerusalem. And I think, I mean, this was just part of the interview, but because this is a very important issue for us in the Arab world, this was the main highlight or the title of this interview. And this was published in Arabic in an international outlet who has also an English edition. And they decided to translate this story. And when they translated this, they removed this paragraph. And then the title of the whole story became about like her struggles and obstacles that she faces as a female scientist, which like the whole narrative of the story is different. So this is one example where you can see like, okay, you support this, but not support that, I mean, it's still one of the problems that she faces, and actually it's political too. But and the recent example, like we have seen this kind of huge empathy and sympathy with Russian assault on Ukraine, but also Russians have assaults in Syria supporting Bashar regime, but nobody cares. I mean, and also I mean, I'm now based in Brussels. I can see the differences of how refugees are treated not equally based on where they are coming from. So what we are asking for, I think, more neutrality and less double standards.
I'm not sure that it's fair to say that nobody cared when Russia was backing Bashar al-Assad, but okay, maybe that's for another context and another day. Julia, you touched on the subject of solidarity earlier on, and you were the recipient of solidarity because you found yourself in a very difficult situation with CONACYT, or rather with the government agents who had come in to take over, to direct CONACYT, and you were accused, along with others, of various things, and you had to fight quite a campaign to clear your name and to defend yourselves. Could you tell us that story? And I'm hesitating to say briefly, because it's really important, but we're beginning to use up the time.
Yes, I'll go very quickly to it. Well, I just wanted to say that Homo sapiens is a terrible species, but it has three wonderful things: art, science, and solidarity. I had read, of course, that solidarity has allowed our species to develop. So, well, I have an experience about solidarity that I want to share with you. Until 3 years ago, I only heard stories of repression, particularly from my parents' past, but never happened anything to me. Suddenly, I was involved in one. It was me and other 30 colleagues of different ages and professions. We are called in the country the 31 scientists. What we have in common is that in a certain moment, we collaborated with the National Council of Science and Technology, CONACYT, the previous one, in the previous administration, and with an autonomous organization that is called the Forum of Science and Technology, that was also created by the Law of Science and Technology, and CONACYT supported this forum for 30 years. The head of the present CONACYT, in a very Lysenko style, decided that there shouldn't be any autonomous voices because the forum was an autonomous voice supported by the government. So in what seems to be a very strange agreement with the general attorney, he accused all of these 31 people that were involved in this relation of organized crime, which in my country is a terrible charge. I mean, it's the drug dealers that have the organized crime, and it means going to prison. So they demanded these imprisonment orders for us. And they asked this to the judge of Almoloya. Almoloya is the high security jail in my country. And I can imagine the face of the judge that has drug dealers and the worst criminals of my country, which are not very nice people. And now he had to give these orders for physicists, biologists, astronomers. So he said no. He said, we need more justification. And in this moment, there was a huge solidarity. Of course, the personal one, your family, your friends that are always backing you, the solidarity among us, the 31, but there was also this official solidarity, letters sent to the Mexican president, letters sent to the Mexican embassies around the world, letters to the public opinion, support from the Mexican Congress, a declaration from Michel Bachelet in her office supporting us, the support from the Mexican Human Rights Commission, support from the International Human Rights Network of Academics and Scholarly Societies. I cannot give here the complete list because Brian will not allow me, but there were dozens, many Mexican universities, private and public, all Mexican academic societies, national and from all the states of Mexico, many international academies, such as the National Academies of the United States, the World Academy Association, the North American and Caribbean Network of Learning and Innovation and Competence Building Systems, the same thing for Latin America, the Academy of Science from Brazil, Uruguay, Venezuela, Chile, Argentina, REPOP, the Spanish astronomers, Mexican National Science Prize winners, researchers, industry organizations, students organizations, science communicator, and science journalist. Preparing this webinar, I felt so touched by this because I read them again. And I just want to use this webinar to say thank you to all of you. These letters, opinions, and of course the fact that we are completely innocent were fundamental for the judge to decide in a definite way, for the second time, that there was no organized crime and there was no real case against us. Besides these 31 scientists, there is a huge problem in my country in sort of destroying the science and technology system, the previous system. And very soon there will be a new science and technology law. And it is very important that the academic community participates and defends the freedom of research and the freedom of speech. And just to finish, I'm there, Brian, but I want to recommend a book. It's called Brave Genius by Jean Carroll, and tells the story of Albert Camus and Jacques Monod, both, Nobel Prizes, which fought against Lysenko and the way Lysenko and Stalin managed science in the Soviet Union. And I just want to finish with a phrase of Camus that I think that Michel has been using very well. And he said, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." And this is my advice to science communicators: never give up fighting for freedom of speech, freedom of research, basic, both of them, for having a democracy. So that's my story, Brian.
Thank you, and also very inspiring. Would you mind putting the name of the book and author into chat or somewhere, just in case people didn't quite pick it up there? Okay.
Yes, I will do it in this moment. It's a very, very good book. They both started actually, fighting the French resistance. Yeah. That's the way the book starts.
Okay.
Okay, I will put it.
And congratulations on the campaign. I mean, it takes a lot of courage and organization to do that. And I was very aware that people were looking for support from outside of your country for you and your colleagues. And it certainly was very effective. Marlit, can I come back to you? There's a question from Andrew Pleasant, and it relates to the Supreme Court, well, the leaked document from the Supreme Court. And he's saying that this is an issue that does involve science and science communication, and one that we should be taking up. Are you hesitant to do so even now, or would you like to respond to what Andrew has said there? Have you seen it?
So I do. How do you? His final question is, a couple of questions. Do we collect stories and promote individual careers or create action to improve the world? How do you propose we negotiate the fine but too often blurred lines between advocacy and political lobbying?
Yes.
I feel it is contingent on the circumstances, of course. And in this case, he's referring to the Supreme Court leaked document. I forget the headline exactly, but basically trying to overturn an important piece of legislation in the United States that has protected women for 50 years in terms of their reproductive rights. And Andrew, I don't have a great answer here. How do we negotiate the fine but blurred lines between advocacy and political lobbying? It comes down to, I think, a lot of the things that Michel was struggling with in his role of, being loyal to your values and recognizing that there are generations that are coming after you, that you need to create an infrastructure for where they can be successful. I'll stop there.
No, fair enough. I mean, I would have some difficulty understanding precisely what the question is, but I think in the American context, there would be a clear distinction made between advocacy and political lobbying, and political lobbying has particular connotations. I guess that we advocate for science, we advocate for freedom of research and freedom of speech, as Julio's been talking about. We would advocate presumably for the rights of women to have access to the full range of services that have to do with reproduction. That is in some way a scientific question, as you alluded to earlier on at the beginning of your presentation, Marlit, and it is also partly a science communication question, but it's also a question for individual citizens to decide which way they want to stand. But let's unless somebody else wants to come in on that particular question, which is very much of the moment, and I guess I understand Marlit's hesitations. We don't precisely know how this is going to play out in the American political and judicial context. Unless somebody else wants to contribute, we'll maybe take another question. It's from Carolina Llorente-Lope. In your opinion, to what extent is it the responsibility of science communicators to bring to light specific stories that put the spotlight on unpleasant situations to promote global or governmental change? So what is the responsibility of science communicators to bring to light specific stories that put the spotlight on unpleasant situations? And I wonder what examples we might be thinking of there. Does anybody here, anybody of the panel, want to see if they can make a fist of interpreting and answering the question? Yeah, go on, Julia.
There is a duty to tell the truth, but you have to be careful because you have to be very well informed. So science communicators have a big responsibility of being well informed, of really knowing the facts, not to speculate, and try to be objective. Of course, it's very difficult because we all have a way of seeing things, and it's normal that the way you see things sort of percolates to whatever you do. But there is I think that the duty is really with real facts. And I do think we have the duty, of course, to tell the truth once we are well informed. Of course, I'm talking of the scientific truth, which is not the absolute truth. It's the facts we have, the things we have with us. I think that actually Michel has just given us an example of this. I mean, and well, let me tell you that 31 scientists have the same problem. I mean, we just were doing our job. We were just working for science. So yes, I think we have a duty to do our work in a responsible way. And to tell the truth, once we are well informed, and to pass this to the society as a whole. Of course, science communicators have to decide their public, and it's not the same thing to give a speech to small children than to give a speech in the university. That I don't have to explain that. So we will have to find the ways depending on who we are talking to. Let me ask something for Tos. I know that Tos asked this a very long time ago, but I just want to tell Tos that I agree absolutely with him because science is revolutionary. Whenever a democracy starts having problems, scientists are in the black. That has happened with all the countries where democracy is in danger. Of course, that scientists are not the right people because they are critical by training. They give their opinion, they analyze, they give the facts, they explain about climate change. I mean, they tell the truth, the scientific truth. So yes, I agree with those. Science is revolutionary, and when a party is less democratic, goes against science. I mean, there is no doubt, we have seen that many times. And you can say that of any party of the world. In the moment that science starts to be an enemy, is because this party is going away from democracy. Well, that's just answering Tos' remark in the beginning.
Well, but you referred earlier on to Lysenko in Stalinist Russia, and scientists did subscribe to and support fundamentally anti-democratic and authoritarian ideas there.
Oh, well, of course, because scientists are human beings, and you can find all sorts of scientists. I agree with you. Power corrupts everybody, scientists and non-scientists. And yes, of course, Lysenko was collaborator to Stalin, and they just killed whoever was against it. Yes, yes, I agree. I didn't want to say, please, if it sounds like that scientists are perfect. I mean, of course, there are scientists that do wrong things, in the same way that there are women that do wrong things, although there are many very good women. I mean, you are not defined by your profession or your gender. You need something else to become the right sort of human being. I agree with you. I should have said that. But science as a discipline is revolutionary. Not all scientists understand that. I agree with you.
Yeah, so I think we have to, I mean, that's very important from a science communication point of view, that we distinguish between ideal science or scientific norms as they have been understood over several centuries, and real science, which very often looks quite different, which is competitive, hierarchical, or it can be, and can act against the interests of people. So I think that's an important issue for science communication, is that we're not advocating that all science conforms to the best standards of science. But science,
I agree absolutely.
Okay, we won't repeat the point. I think we have a couple of minutes left, and I think we've covered, at least responded in some way to all or most of the questions there. Does anybody want to make a concluding remark or something that they've got in their minds that they wish they had said? Mohamed, Michel? Are we okay to close at this point? Yeah, go on, Michel, go on, please.
No, maybe just to remind the importance of the PCST network in the current context. It's very, very good that the network can maintain the link between science communicators from all these countries, including those who are in difficult situations, especially these ones, perhaps. So we know this. It's a banality what I say here, but I think it's sometimes good to repeat this, that it's very good that this network exists. We should continue and even develop further the network, because in difficult times, international cooperation, peaceful cooperation is really, really necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel, for that. I don't know that in all the years that we were together in the scientific committee, you, me, Julia, I'm not sure that many times issues came up of this kind, you know, of expressing solidarity with people who are in difficult situations. And it's precisely because that has come up in a very, very acute and extreme form just in the recent times that we're holding this discussion. And that is part of discussions within PCST about defining our role as not just as a network of exchange, but also as a network of solidarity. Julia, your hand is raised on the screen. Is that intended?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't say thank you enough. Thank you to PCST. Thank you to Brian, to all my colleagues for your solidarity. Thank you so much. That's all.
Not at all. You entirely deserved it, and you have great friends in Mexico who made sure that we understood the difficulties that you and your colleagues were in, and who did great work on your behalf. Any last words, Marlit or Mohamed? No. Yeah, well, thank you.
Just would like.
Yes, Mohamed. Sorry. Yeah, go on.
Just like to add a small thing from actually the stories were shared today here, that like. I would say what I noticed that usually, like, even if you have this well-established democracy, you still face a lot of problems. And I can say, like, we have a lot to do. I mean, we need to do more, even if it's in a well-established democracy or non-democratic states. There are a lot that could be done by us as science communicators.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marlit, Mohamed, Michel, Julia. Thank you to Jenny, Metcalf, and Ana Claudia Napote behind the scenes here. And there's thanks coming in from various parts of the world. We've people here from Costa Rica, from India, I can see, from Spain, from New Zealand, from Austria, India. And I hope you've all got something from this discussion and that these kinds of issues will continue to be thrashed out in various ways, I'm sure, including perhaps at our conference in 2023. Of which the program, or the outline program at least, will be announced soon, the call for proposals, etc. That's in Rotterdam in April in 2023. At the very latest, that will be when we manage to meet again in person. Let's hope, at least, let's hope. I'm going to close it now. We've done 1 hour and 3 minutes, and that's the intention that we finish after an hour. Michel from Australia saying, thanks very much, great discussion. Sarah from Austria saying, thank you to all. So thank you, and lots to think about, and lots to feel very proud of in the support that was given to Julia, and in the way in which Julia conducted herself through all of this, and lots to feel proud of in what Michel has outlined. And it's really quite moving, and yeah, solidarity. Goodbye.